The day started like any other. I was on my usual route, hauling a load of goods across the state. The sun was high, and the air was thick with the promise of another scorching summer day. Traffic was horrendous, as usual, so I decided to take a detour down an old, overgrown road that I'd never noticed before. I had a deadline to meet, and I figured a shortcut would save me some time. Little did I know I was about to enter a nightmare I couldn't escape. The road was narrow and winding, barely wide enough for my rig. Trees leaned in from both sides, their branches clawing at my truck like skeletal fingers. As I drove deeper, the canopy above thickened, blocking out the sun and casting eerie shadows on the road. I began to notice signs of past civilization. Rusty, dilapidated road signs, overgrown driveways leading to nowhere, and the occasional crumbling foundation of a house long abandoned. A sense of unease settled over me. I checked my rearview mirror, half expecting to see another vehicle behind me, but there was nothing. The road seemed to stretch on forever, a never-ending tunnel of green and shadow. I turned on the radio to break the silence, but all I got was static. My phone had no signal either. I was completely cut off. After what felt like hours, I came across a faded sign that read, "Welcome to Cold Brook." The letters were barely legible, worn away by time and weather. I'd never heard of Cold Brook, and it wasn't on any map I'd seen. Curiosity piqued. I decided to explore further. Maybe I'd find someone who could point me back to the main highway. The town was a ghost town in every sense of the word. The buildings were old and decayed, with boarded-up windows and doors hanging off their hinges. Weeds and vines had taken over, wrapping around anything they could reach. The only sound was the creak of my truck as I navigated the cracked and potholed streets. I stopped in front of what must have once been the town's general store. The sign above the door was missing several letters, but I could still make out General S. Orr. I stepped out of the truck, the gravel crunching under my boots. The air was thick with the smell of mold and rot. As I approached the door, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. Just the shadows playing tricks on me, I told myself. I pushed the door open, and it creaked loudly in protest. Inside, the store was dark and musty. Dust covered everything, and the shelves were bare, save for a few rusty cans and broken bottles. I was about to leave when I heard a faint whisper. My heart raced, and I froze, straining to listen. The whisper came again, a soft, unintelligible murmur that seemed to come from the shadows. I backed out of the store and nearly ran to my truck. I wasn't about to stick around and find out who or what was whispering in that abandoned place. I jumped into the cab and started the engine. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw them. Figures standing in the middle of the road, watching me. They were just silhouettes, but there was something off about them. They were too still, too silent. I sped up, wanting to put as much distance between me and Cold Brook as possible. But the figures didn't disappear. Every time I looked in the mirror, they were there. Always the same distance behind me, no matter how fast I drove. Panic set in. I floored the gas pedal, my truck roaring as it tore down the overgrown road. I must have driven for hours, but it felt like I was getting nowhere. The road seemed to loop back on itself, and the figures remained a constant presence in my mirror. Desperation clawed at me. I had to get out of here. The sky began to darken, and with it came a thick fog that swallowed everything. I could barely see a few feet in front of me. The figures grew closer, their shapes becoming more defined. They weren't human, at least not anymore. Their faces were gaunt, eyes hollow and glowing with an unnatural light. They reached out with skeletal hands, their mouths moving as if chanting some dreadful incantation. I knew I had to keep moving. I couldn't let them catch me. I gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The truck barreled through the fog, and suddenly, I saw it. A break in the trees, a way out. I veered toward it, praying it wasn't another trick. The truck burst through the foliage and onto a familiar highway. The figures vanished, and the fog lifted as quickly as it had descended. I pulled over to the side of the road, my heart pounding in my chest. I was drenched in sweat, and my hands were shaking. I sat there for a long time, trying to process what had happened. When I finally mustered the courage to look back, the old overgrown road was gone. There was no sign of Coldbrook, or the nightmare I'd just escaped. It was as if it had never existed. I never took a detour again. From that day on, I stuck to the main roads, traffic be damned. I couldn't shake the feeling that Coldbrook was still out there, waiting for the next unwary traveler to stumble upon it. And those figures, I knew they were real. They were still out there, too. Lost souls trapped in a place forgotten by time. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of a shadow in my rearview mirror, and my heart would skip a beat. I knew it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but deep down, I couldn't help but wonder if they were still watching, waiting for their next chance to pull someone else into their eternal nightmare. The highway stretched before me, a ribbon of asphalt winding through the darkened countryside. The hum of my 18-wheeler's engine was a comforting constant, a low growl that drowned out the whispers of the night. I had been a trucker for over 20 years, hauling freight from coast to coast, and I knew these roads like the back of my hand. Tonight, though, something felt off. It started as a feeling, a prickling at the back of my neck that made the hairs stand on end. I glanced at the rearview mirror for the 100th time, half expecting to see something out of the ordinary. But all I saw were the empty road and the faint glow of my taillights. Still, the feeling persisted, gnawing at the edges of my mind. I shook my head, trying to dispel the unease. Maybe I was just tired. It had been a long haul from Chicago to Denver, and I was running on nothing but coffee and adrenaline. I turned up the radio, hoping to drown out the creeping sense of dread, but the crackling static only made it worse. Just as I was about to switch off the radio, I saw it. A pair of headlights in the distance, growing larger in my mirror. Relief washed over me. Another vehicle on the road, a fellow traveler. But as the lights drew closer, I realized something was wrong. The headlights were too high, too far apart. It wasn't a car. It was a truck, a big one, and it was gaining on me fast. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles whitening. The other truck's lights were blinding now, filling my mirrors with a harsh, unrelenting glare. I squinted, trying to make out any details, but the light was too bright. I flicked my signal and pulled into the right lane, hoping the truck would pass, but it didn't. Instead, it stayed right behind me, matching my every move. Damn it, I muttered under my breath. I tapped the brake lightly, just enough to signal my intention, but the truck didn't budge. It was so close now that I could hear the roar of its engine over my own. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead, and I fought the urge to accelerate. This was crazy. No trucker in his right mind would tailgate like this, especially not on an open road with no traffic. I grabbed the CB radio, my hand shaking. "Breaker, breaker, this is Big Red. Who's on my 6? Over." Silence. "Come on, man. This ain't funny. Identify yourself. Over." Nothing but static. I glanced in the mirror again, and my heart skipped a beat. The headlights were gone, but I could still feel the truck behind me. A massive, malevolent presence, lurking just out of sight. My mind raced. Was it some kind of prank? A ghost truck? No, that was ridiculous. Ghosts weren't real. But then what? I decided to pull over at the next rest stop. If this guy wanted to play games, he could do it without me. The rest stop sign loomed ahead, and I flicked on my turn signal, slowing down as I approached the exit. The moment my wheels left the highway, the feeling of being followed intensified. I glanced in the mirror again, and there it was. The truck, its headlights flaring to life as it followed me off the road. Panic surged through me. This wasn't just some jerk playing chicken. This was something else, something far more sinister. I floored the gas pedal, my truck lurching forward as I raced down the exit ramp. The other truck followed, its headlights glaring, its engine growling like a beast. I skidded into the rest stop, tires screeching, and threw the truck into park. I jumped out, my heart pounding, and turned to confront my pursuer. But there was nothing there. The parking lot was empty, the highway silent. The other truck had vanished into thin air. I stood there, breathing hard, my mind reeling. Had I imagined it? No, I couldn't have. The fear was too real, too visceral. I wiped the sweat from my brow and climbed back into my cab, locking the doors behind me. I needed to get a grip. Maybe a few hours of sleep would clear my head. I reclined the seat and closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Every creak of the truck, every rustle of the wind outside set my nerves on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, hunted. Hours passed in a tense, sleepless haze until dawn finally broke, the pale light of morning spilling across the lot. I started the engine and pulled back onto the highway, my eyes scanning the mirrors constantly. The feeling of being followed had lessened with the daylight, but it hadn't disappeared entirely. I drove on, the miles ticking away, the landscape blurring past. But no matter how far I went, the sense of dread clung to me like a shadow. By the time I reached Denver, I was a wreck. I parked at the depot and stumbled out of the cab, my legs shaky. I needed answers. Something was after me. Something I couldn't explain, and I had to find out why. I spent the next few days researching, talking to other truckers, scouring the internet for stories of ghost trucks and haunted highways. Most people thought I was crazy, but a few listened. One old-timer, a grizzled veteran named Hank, took me aside after I told him my story. "Son," he said, his voice low and gravelly, "I've heard tales like yours before. They say there's a demon out there, a creature that hunts truckers. It feeds on fear, grows stronger the more you try to escape. Some say it's the spirit of a trucker who died in a wreck. Others say it's something older, something evil." I stared at him, my mouth dry. What can I do? How do I stop it? Hank shook his head. "I don't know if you can, but I do know this. You can't run from it. The more you try, the closer it gets. You have to face it, confront it head on." His words echoed in my mind as I left the depot. Face it. Confront it. But how? I had no idea where to start. That night, I hit the road again, my mind racing. If I couldn't outrun it, maybe I could outsmart it. The feeling of being followed returned as soon as I left the city limits. I checked my mirrors, half expecting to see those headlights again, but the road behind me was empty. I drove on, my thoughts a jumble of fear and determination. Hours passed, the road stretching endlessly before me. The sense of dread grew stronger, a weight pressing down on my chest. I gripped the wheel, my knuckles white, and forced myself to keep driving. I couldn't stop, not now. Then, In the dead of night, I saw it. The headlights appeared in my mirror, distant at first, then growing closer, brighter. My heart pounded, but I didn't speed up. Instead, I slowed down, letting the truck catch up. The headlights bore down on me, filling the cab with a blinding light. I took a deep breath and slammed on the brakes, bringing my truck to a screeching halt. The other truck swerved to avoid me, its headlights swinging wildly before it came to a stop beside me. I jumped out of the cab, my heart in my throat, and ran towards the other truck. But as I approached, the lights flickered and died. The truck was gone, vanished into the night. In its place stood a figure, tall and shadowy, its eyes glowing with a malevolent red light. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice shaking. "What do you want?" The figure stepped closer, its form shifting and twisting like smoke. "I am the darkness," it hissed, its voice a cold whisper. "I am the fear that haunts you, the demon that follows you. You cannot escape me." I took a step back, my mind racing. Why? Why are you after me?" The demon laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "Because you run, because you fear. Your terror is my strength, your despair my power. The more you flee, the stronger I become." I stared at the creature, my mind reeling. Hank was right. I couldn't run from it. I had to face it. Summoning all my courage, I stepped forward, meeting the demon's glowing eyes. "You're not real," I said, my voice trembling but steady. "You're just a manifestation of my fear. You have no power over me." The demon snarled, its form flickering. "Foolish mortal, you cannot banish me so easily." "No," I said, standing my ground. "But I can stop running. I can stop feeding you. You thrive on fear, but I'm done being afraid." The demon's eyes blazed brighter, and for a moment, I thought it would attack. But then it began to fade, its form dissolving into the night. I stood there, watching as it vanished, the weight lifting from my chest. I climbed back into my truck, my hands shaking, and took a deep breath. The road stretched out before me, dark and endless, but the fear was gone. I had faced the demon and won, and as I drove into the night, I knew that no matter what came my way, I would never run again. I had been a trucker for over 20 years, and I thought I had seen it all. The endless highways, the deserted rest stops, the late-night diners with their flickering neon lights. These were my familiar haunts. But nothing could have prepared me for the night I broke down in the middle of the dark woods. The sun was setting when my rig started to cough and sputter. The engine light blinked on, casting an ominous red glow on the dashboard. I pulled over to the side of the narrow, winding road and popped the hood, hoping it was something minor. As I stepped out, I was struck by the eerie silence. No birds, no rustling leaves, just an oppressive, suffocating stillness. I fumbled with the engine, but it was no use. I was stranded. My phone had no signal, and the nearest town was miles away. The darkness closed in, and the dense forest seemed to press against me, the trees looming like silent sentinels. I decided to spend the night in the cab and figure things out in the morning. I climbed back into the truck, locked the doors, and settled into my seat. The wind howled outside, and the temperature dropped rapidly. I shivered and wrapped my jacket tighter around me. Just as I was about to doze off, I heard a faint whispering sound. I sat up, straining to listen. The whispers grew louder, filling the cab with a cacophony of voices. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice trembling. The whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by an oppressive silence. I peered out the window, but the darkness was impenetrable. My heart pounded as I fumbled for my flashlight and shone it into the woods. The beam of light cut through the night, revealing twisted branches and gnarled roots, but no sign of anyone or anything. I tried to shake off the unease and settled back into my seat. As sleep finally began to claim me, a loud bang jolted me awake. It sounded like something heavy had hit the side of the truck. I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously opened the door, stepping out into the freezing night. The beam of my flashlight danced across the trees, casting long, sinister shadows. I walked around the truck, but there was nothing. No sign of what had caused the noise. Just as I was about to climb back in, I saw it. A pair of glowing eyes staring at me from the darkness. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The eyes were unblinking, watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I took a step back, and the eyes moved closer, revealing a shadowy figure. It was tall and gaunt, with long, bony fingers that seemed to reach out for me. Panic surged through me, and I scrambled back into the truck, slamming the door shut. The creature pressed its face against the window, its eyes boring into mine. I could see its mouth moving, but I couldn't hear what it was saying. I fumbled for my keys and tried to start the engine, but it was dead. The creature began to claw at the window, its nails screeching against the glass. I screamed, feeling trapped and helpless. Just when I thought the window would shatter, the creature suddenly stopped and retreated into the darkness. I sat there, trembling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The whispers returned, louder this time, filling the cab with a sense of impending doom. I knew I couldn't stay here. I had to find help. I grabbed my flashlight and a heavy wrench for protection, then stepped out of the truck. The whispers seemed to guide me, leading me deeper into the woods. The trees closed in around me, their branches like skeletal hands reaching out to grab me. I walked for what felt like hours, the whispers growing louder and more insistent. I stumbled upon a clearing and saw an old, dilapidated cabin. The windows were boarded up, and the door hung off its hinges. But it was shelter, and I had no other options. I approached the cabin cautiously, my flashlight flickering. As I stepped inside, the smell of decay hit me like a wall. The floorboards creaked under my weight, and the air was thick with dust. I shone my flashlight around, revealing broken furniture and rotting walls. In the corner, I saw a trapdoor, slightly ajar. Curiosity got the better of me, and I approached the trapdoor. The whispers were deafening now, urging me to open it. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the handle. Taking a deep breath, I pulled it open and shone my flashlight down into the darkness. A set of stairs led into a basement. The air was colder down there, and I could see my breath misting in the beam of the flashlight. I descended slowly, each step creaking ominously. At the bottom, I found a room filled with strange symbols and old tattered books. In the center of the room was an altar, covered in dried blood. My stomach churned as I realized what I was looking at. This was a place of dark rituals, and I had stumbled right into it. The whispers grew louder, almost unbearable, and I felt a presence behind me. I spun around and came face to face with a figure cloaked in shadow. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and it spoke in a voice that seemed to echo in my mind. "You should not have come here," it said, its voice a mix of anger and sorrow. "This place is cursed, and now you are too." I backed away, but the figure advanced, its form shifting and changing. It reached out with a skeletal hand, and I felt a cold grip around my heart. Pain shot through me, and I fell to my knees, gasping for breath. The figure loomed over me, and I knew I was facing something far worse than death. It leaned in close, its breath cold against my skin. "You will join us," it whispered. "You will never leave these woods." I screamed, the sound echoing through the basement. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was the figure's eyes, burning with an unholy light. When I woke, I was back in my truck. The engine was running, and the sun was rising. For a moment, I thought it had all been a nightmare. But then I saw the blood on my hands and the marks on my arms, and I knew it was real. I drove out of the dark woods as fast as I could, never looking back. But the whispers followed me, haunting my every step. I can still hear them, even now, as I write this. They are always with me, a constant reminder that I escaped the dark woods, but I will never truly be free.